They asked Michelangelo, the great sculptor, I asked him, how do you make these beautiful figures? And he says, the figure, the form, is already in the stone. All I am doing is removing all the stone that is not the form. Basically, that's what you need to do with your documentary. You need to take away everything that isn't going to make a great documentary. So how do you start this process? You are stuck with, let's see, you're stuck with a box of tapes or a drive full of files. Now, some of you will have shot these tapes or shot these files yourself. Sometimes you will get them from other sources. The thing to do when you start receiving the tapes, start getting those files, is you need to catalog everything. And right away, don't put it off. Don't say, well, I'll start cataloging when I get more tapes. Because the files, the tapes, once you start collecting stuff for a documentary, it's very easy for it to get out of control. So you have to start a system. You have to keep track of all the tapes. And now, files are very handy. I shoot with a camera that doesn't shoot to tape, shoots to files. I find them very handy. The files are only as long as the shot. Each shot makes an individual file. And the thing I really like about it is that the file carries the date it was shot. On the downside of it, when you import those files into Final Cut Pro, a lot of times you get the date that you import it. So in other words, if you shot everything over a course of 6 months, imported it all on one day, the Final Cut Pro file is going to have that day's files. So just be aware of that when you're keeping track of it, because when you shot something, sometimes becomes very important in terms of a documentary. Now, for everything that you generate, everything that you're going to use in your documentary, you need a transcript and you need a log. First of all, you've heard of logging your footage. You look at it, you write down the time code for stuff that you need. Good parts of interviews, great shots, sound effects, log all that. You also need a transcript for any interviews or any dialogue. And there's no way you can get around it. Transcripts are very time-consuming, cost money if you don't do it yourself, and I'm suggesting you don't do it yourself because you have more important things to do, because you have a documentary to make. So what a transcript is you give it to a typist. They will listen to the videotape or the DVD. Usually it's a DVD you're giving them. And they type out all the words on a page. They're also on at least once per page. I asked them to do it twice per page, but at least once per page. At the top of the page, they put down a time code number. So at the end of the process, let's say your reel number 27 is an interview with somebody. Then with reel 27, you have a transcript, which has every word that was spoken, every question, every answer, and you have time code numbers to refer back to. Now, as you gather interviews, you're going to want to put this into a big binder. And that's what I ended up with, a binder fat with papers that had all the logs, all the transcripts of those 80 reels, then the other 30 interviews we did, and a lot of other acquired footage. But get somebody to transcribe it, but absolutely log it yourself. You need to look at your footage. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't jump in and start editing without knowing what's on your footage, because it is a waste of time. Even if you make a great edit today, you'll see other footage that you should have included with it tomorrow and then have to take apart your great edit, and will be for naught. So definitely log it yourself. Now, with every reel, with reels of tape it's easy. With files that you have on a hard drive, it's going to be a little more difficult. You have to work out a system. But basically, you make one DVD time code window, a DVD with a time code window. That is a DVD copy of your raw tape or your raw file, but it has the time code displayed on the DVD, which you normally don't see off the tape. And you don't want that time code window in the corner of the screen for the finished documentary. But your reference copy on DVD has the time code on it. This is the easiest way to log for me, and probably will be for you, because it's more likely you have a DVD player in the house, in your computer or something separate that plays DVDs. And you probably have a remote with that. So it becomes very easy to log. You sit there, you have the remote in your left hand, and you have your notebook in your right hand. You watch it until you see something that you like. You write down what it is you like, why you like it, and what the time code is. When you're doing a transcript, the same thing. You go through, you listen to the interview, and as you hear things, statements that you think you will use, you mark them off in the transcript. This enables you to do what's called a paper edit. Highly recommended. It's not as difficult as Final Cut Pro. It's not as technical. And you can save a lot of time because you're just editing words on a page. Now, you can either do it on paper like I do and just kind of draw circles and lines and brackets and just highlight everything that I think I'm going to need. Or you could have it in Microsoft Word and then start highlighting the individual words. Also with Microsoft Word, eventually you can take those transcripts and make it into a working script, which also comes in very handy. Now, I'll just tell you a very quick story. This documentary we were doing, we were working on, we got the tapes in different batches. So we started working on it immediately before we had seen all the tapes and before we had all the transcripts. And of course, the director wanted to edit this one interview that we didn't have the transcript for. We just sent it to the people who typed it up. So we start editing and get a good little sequence out of it, just for this one part of the documentary. And then the director says, you know, where's that part where he said so-and-so? I said, yeah, that would be good if we had that one part where he said whatever he said. But we didn't have the transcript. 2.5 hours later, when I'm cursing at the director and saying, where's our goddamn transcript, we found that one sentence. And it was only 2 minutes before the spot we were looking for it on the tape. But it took us 2.5 hours to find it. Because I got hung up on that one piece. Because he suggested it, and I said, yeah, that would be good. That would finish this one piece. And then, so we just did it, and then I said, you know, we're not doing anything else until we get the transcripts. The transcripts, you have them on paper. They're organized into a book. You can flip through the pages easily. And you're constantly making notes on the transcripts. So therefore, I put a lot of notes in the margin where I could see flipping through the pages real fast. So for every reel or every batch of files, you should have a DVD timecode copy, which you will do your logging on. You might also want a duplicate of that DVD copy to send to the people who are doing the transcripts. You need the transcript, the log, and you need to know where on the computer you've captured it to. That's why I say start a system, begin a system, and stick with it. So make sure that the real number on your DVD is the actual real number. It's the same real number that you have at the top of the transcript, the top of the log, and it's identified somewhere in your computer as that reel, so you don't go crazy looking for stuff. Because the thing is, once you start to shoot stuff for a documentary, it piles up very quickly. It's very easy to lose track of everything. So don't let that happen to you. Don't let yourself get backlogged. It's, as you can see, making a documentary does involve some work, and it is time-consuming. The 52-minute documentary I worked on, I figure we put in about 3,000 hours of editing over the course of a year and a half. A lot of editing, like having another full-time job. And we were still, tweaking it after that. Just before the first screening. First screening was in February of 2010. That weekend before that, we sat down and we cut 16 minutes out of the documentary. We just both had a feeling that it should be tighter, should be faster, could be better. And we sat down and we got ruthless. We cut 16 minutes. We didn't believe it when we finished, but then we looked at it. I said, yeah, that's it. That's what we were trying to achieve. This is tight. We lost a lot of stuff, but it's a stronger statement as is. with all this stuff together without all that stuff. By the way, if you acquire footage, keep track of where that came from, who you got it from, their phone number, their contact information, and of course you will need this for rights later on when you try and distribute your film. You're going to need to know who owns that footage, because a distributor wants to know that. When you copyright it, you're going to need to know who owns that footage and that you have permission for it and what kind of credits to give everybody. Okay, what do I have here next? Capture and transfer everything at once. Not always possible on a documentary. As I said, we started with some of the tapes. We did not have all of the tapes. So we didn't capture everything at once, and we kept, over the year and a half, we kept getting more and more material from different sources. So I found that process of having to go back, oh, I got to capture this reel and that reel, and we have this extra DVD. It's better if you can do it all at once, and it's a lot more organized. It's not always possible. If you are shooting on a camera that does not take tape, or even if you're shooting on a camera that takes tape, keep your clips under 5 minutes. Unless it's an interview, unless it's something constantly happening over the course of 5 minutes, you should be able to stop and start your camera. And by the way, to you people who are just beginning to shoot stuff, do not make the mistake that most people make. They turn on, I'm going to document this seminar. They turn on their camera and they leave their camera on and they walk around. And, oh, look, there's a light up there. There's a pretty girl over there. And you have the impression, because your camera was on, you're walking around and you kind of flash it over here and over there. Oh, I got everything. I got everything in the seminar. You go home and you realize you don't have anything, or you have everything in fleeting shots that you cannot use, or you need to slow down or still frame. No, you should be going around doing individual shots. Try and avoid, your zoom in, zooms out, camera movements. They may look really neat and may look really effective when you're shooting it, but when you get in the edit room, it's really hard to edit two pieces of footage together that have camera moves in them. It becomes more and more difficult. So get your static shots and make sure you've got the shot. Make sure you've got the shot. Don't just assume, oh, I pointed my camera over there, therefore I have a picture of this young lady. No, if you need a picture of this young lady, stand there, frame your shot, get that shot of that young lady. Don't assume anything, because when you get in the edit room, having just fleeting shots and moving shots can be a disaster and can make your documentary impossible to watch. So get individual shots and make sure you've got them. By the way, if you shoot, most high-definition cameras now shoot a file, a compression called AVC HD. It's wonderful stuff. It compresses it way down. It still keeps the quality up. The thing to know, that when you import it into Final Cut Pro, the files blossom. Your 10 gigabyte file or your 1 gigabyte file may be 10 or 12 gigabytes by the time you've imported it. So just be aware of that, and you'll always need more hard drive space. You always need more hard drive space. That's a truism of all editing. So should you capture everything? Should you capture everything? In Final Cut Pro classes, they tell you be selective about what you capture. So that's up to you. That's according to what you shoot. I tend to capture everything. I've been an editor for a very long time. I don't shoot a lot more than I need. Why? Because in my head, as an editor, I know what I need to put together. So whenever I go out and shoot something, my head is automatically cataloged. Okay, I have a shot from the outside. That's a good establishing shot. I have an alternate for that. I have close-ups of this. I have close-ups of that. I know when to put the camera away. And if you start doing individual shots instead of just waving your camera around and saying, oh, I have this, I have this, I have that. If you start doing individual shots, then you will start doing that process in your head, because you realize, okay, I have a lot of stuff in here, but everybody has an umbrella and it's a rainy day. Maybe I should go outside and get a shot of the rain. But as you shoot more, as you edit more, you'll find what kind of shots are useless, and you will avoid them. So should you capture everything? That's up to you. That's up to the material you have captured. One of the things that we did on our documentary, we captured everything. We captured all 80 hours of tape. One of the reasons was because it had been, I wasn't sure of the conditions of tapes. They'd been through a typhoon, and they had been, not smuggled, but they had been sent to the American Embassy, then sent to Thailand, and they'd come a very weird route back to New York. I'm like, are these tapes like going to play back? So we captured everything, but it was very time consuming. But we did capture everything. So my advice is, if you're in doubt, go ahead and capture it. It's only hard drive space, and it takes more time to go back if you have not captured it. So when in doubt, capture it. It's just a few more gigabytes on your hard drive. Okay. Now, when you log, you should be relaxed and comfortable. You shouldn't be multitasking, shouldn't be, texting somebody on the phone, shouldn't really have a television program on that you're interested in. You need to be relaxed and comfortable, and you need to concentrate. If you're not, and be thinking about your documentary. If you're not, you'll miss stuff. Don't miss stuff. Don't rule this is my rule, I don't rule anything out until I know why. In other words, if there's something there that I think I can use, I will capture it, I will log it, I will make notes of it. Because I have not formed the entire piece yet, I don't know exactly what I need. I have a good idea, but, so if I don't know why I'm not going to use something, I assume I'm going to use something. If I know why, if this shot is totally out of focus and they don't say anything good, well, that's a reason why. I can rule that out. But if they say something that might be relevant and it's in focus, then I think I might need it. Okay, don't rule it out yet. You don't rule anything out until you know why, because the project will change on you. The project will change. And I just suggest you read the transcripts after you log, after you watch the interview, after you watch that reel, because then you're in much better shape to evaluate what's being said, and you know how it was said and the conditions of the interview. You have an interview in the studio, probably the whole interview is good. If it's an interview done on the street, there may be traffic noise, parts of the interview may be inaudible. So that's why I say read your transcripts after you log. Now, when you're logging, you also listen. You want to listen for sound effects, atmospheric, natural sound. All of these are handy. All of these make an atmosphere, and your sound designer, your sound editor will really appreciate it if you can tell them, hey, those birds are on reel 24 and 35 minutes in. You want those birds? That's where they are. So you also listen when you in the interviews or anything spoken. Listen for emotion sounds. Sometimes people are saying words that read on the paper very flat, but the way they're saying it. Make notes of that. Take note of that, because that can be very effective. Look for cutaways, reactions, close-ups, and details. Cutaways is, you always need a cutaway in an interview because you're probably not going to use every word the person says. If you make a cut in the middle of the interview without a cutaway, then you have a jump cut. Somebody's sitting here and all of a sudden, in between sentences, you notice their whole body moves. That's a jump cut. So you need a cutaway to something if you want to avoid that jump cut. Standard cutaways in news footage are somebody's hands or maybe their desk if they're sitting at a desk, but look for other cutaways. You're not making a news piece, you're making a documentary. But look for those kind of shots that you can use, reaction shots, all that, close-ups, write it down. You never know what you can use, and thing is, when you're finishing the edit, you're going to say, geez, I saw this one shot, I could use it as a cutaway. Where is it? So you have to keep track of everything. Very important. Listen to what the voices are saying, what story they're telling. Are they painting a picture with their words? Are they connecting A to B? Now, if you let's say You've collected all this stuff for a documentary, and you had an idea in your head what you wanted to say in the documentary, but the idea in your head is never going to be exactly what your finished documentary is, because reality comes between. You have to go out and shoot this stuff. And people aren't going to say, unless you give them a script, they aren't going to say exactly what you want them to say. But listen to what they're saying. Now, you have all this stuff in front of you. Let me give you a quick analogy. A good detective trying to solve a murder. A wife is killed, a wife is stabbed. A good detective doesn't automatically say, well, it's the ex-husband, let's go find the evidence to nail him. That's what a bad detective says. A good detective, even if he or she suspects it's the ex-husband, and usually they do in murder cases. You know, wife gets murdered, it's the husband or the ex-husband. Somebody in your family gets murdered, they're going to be asking you questions. That's the way it works, as it usually is. But let's say, okay, a good detective won't go out with that prejudice, won't go out saying, I'm looking for evidence to nail the ex-husband because I know it's him. No, a good detective goes out, collects the evidence in a neutral way. They put the evidence in front of them on the desk, and they say, what story is this telling me? What story is this evidence? What is this evidence saying to me? That's how they begin. That's how you should begin. When I started out on this Burma documentary, the director had a very fixed idea of what he wanted to say. Probably would have turned out to be a 10-hour documentary. However, the footage that we collected, the interviews, we didn't have all those details that he wanted, so it changed over time. We still came out with a very powerful, we still achieved our goal, but it was kind of a different film. You cannot impose your story on those tapes you have in the box or those files that you have in the hard drive. So let the story be told with the material that you have. And if you have to leave something out, well, you make a decision. Do I want to go out and shoot another interview, shoot more stuff to make this point, or do we have enough here to make these other points, and this point isn't so... And you're never going to be able to make all the points you want in a documentary unless you go to a 3, 4, 10-hour documentary, which nobody's going to want to watch anyway. So, by the way, let me just say this. Okay, I've said that. Now, there are way too many documentaries being made. Way too many Your documentary better be good. You know why? Nobody bloody cares about your documentary, your cause. We've all got jobs. I have to pay bills. I'm worried about family members. I'm worried about my apartment. Nobody cares about your documentary. Therefore, it's your job to make them care. Here's worse news now. Most people will see your documentary on a computer, a TV, or God forbid, a phone. Deal with it. It's where we are in the 21st century. You don't think so? Even full-time film critics spend more time watching films on televisions or computers or maybe phones than they do in theaters. A theater is an ideal place to see a documentary. Why? The lights go out. All the seats are facing one way towards the screen. They're all bolted to the floor so you can't turn them around. The film shows at a set time. So that's all a luxury, and that's great. But your goal should be you want this to be seen by the maximum number of people. So consider that if your documentary is seen on a TV, there might be commercials. On a computer, there might be pop-up ads. On a Nook, it might be showing you your Twitter feed or your emails as they're coming in while you're trying to watch a documentary. Consider that. We live in a very distracted society. So not only you have to make people care, but you have to kind of grab them by the collar right away and draw their face into it and say, look at this. This means something. This matters. And then you have to tell them why very quickly. There's a lot of competition out there for your attention. So you've got to be very focused, and you've got to make sure that you make your point, you make it quickly, and you don't stray too much from the point. So, as I said, let me show you this next one. Make them care, make them feel. You're an artist. You're making a documentary, you're an artist, and motion pictures, video, film, one of the most powerful artistic mediums known to man today. It can be very powerful. You all know that. You've all seen documentaries that have changed your mind, that have moved you. So that's what you have to aim for. So, let's just really quickly consider a news story. What's a news story? It's a kind of a documentary. Let's call it a 45-second documentary. Fatal car crash in Queens. What do we see? We see footage of the skid marks. We see this car wreck. We see the twisted steering wheel behind the broken glass. We see cops that are taking measurements and taking notes. We see concerned onlookers. We see the neighbors. We see the neighbors are saying things like, well, they drive too fast past this corner. They ignore the lights. Okay, that's a news story. Now, there's a number of pictures there, but what is driving this news story is not the pictures. All the pictures are after the car crash happened. We don't see the victim. We don't see the circumstances. We just see a car and a bunch of people looking disturbed and kind of concerned standing around a corner of Queens. What drives the story is the sound, and specifically in a news story, it's voices. First the reporter's voice, then they talk to cops, then eyewitnesses and neighbors. That forms the story. That's the information that you get, and kind of everything visual is adding to that, but it doesn't tell you too much. It doesn't tell you too much because of the circumstances of that particular news story. There were no cameras around when the crash happened, so we have to get it all in the aftermath. So maybe because I was a news editor for a long time, but I'm going to treat you all like you're my class. Now, this is not a seminar. So, everybody, what do you do? When do you do it? Always. What do? You cut. What do you cut? The sound. And when do you cut it? First. Again, you always cut the sound for your documentary first. As my colleague upstairs, Devora, she teaches the Final Cut Pro class, she will tell you that if you have your footage shot by an Academy Award-winning director, you have beautiful footage, and your soundtrack is kind of, footage ain't gonna look so good. But if you have a spectacular soundtrack, if you have a great sounding soundtrack, very compelling soundtrack, and mediocre pictures, your pictures look much better. Those pictures will look better than the ones shot by your very expensive Academy Award-winning director. The soundtrack is really what keeps you connected, and if you're trying to say things, most of the time, the soundtrack is what tells them. However, unless you're doing a purely visual documentary, and they kind of approach art, unless you're doing something purely visual, cut the sound first. I close my eyes when I edit. I don't know if you believe me, but ask anybody I've worked with. Some of you are nodding your head. You know, I line up drag it down to the timeline, line it up, make my trims, bring it back, bring the playhead back a couple of edits. I hit the space bar and I do like this. I'm not interested in the visuals at all. Of course, when I'm cutting the sound, there's picture being cut on the timeline too, but I'm ignoring that. I ignore that until the sound makes sense, until the sound is telling me a story, until I get the sound right, I don't touch the picture. Because I can use almost any picture I want if the soundtrack is good. You're a lot more flexible in what visuals you use than you are with what you can use for the soundtrack. The soundtrack has to be good first. And it's after I've cut an entire sequence and I have all the sounds in place and everything, then I start looking for picture. First of all, I'll look at what's been cut with the sound. I'll say, well, I want to move that, I want to move that, I want to move that, and how can I make this more exciting, because right now it's all talking heads. I want to illustrate this footage. So listen Listen to what you're editing and make sure the sound is good before you move on to the picture. It's very, very important. And when you edit, well, when I edit, I'll tell you a little about my editing style. I try and get multiple interviews and start rearranging, start mixing up what the people have to say. You are rearranging for clarity first. You want to be clear. Again, remember, people are watching in very distracted circumstances, on their phones, on their Nooks, on their iPads, whatever. So you have to be clear, but I also rearrange then for impact and dramatic timing. But when you rearrange your stuff, when you rearrange, and I'm also doing this at the point that I'm looking at the transcript. When it's still words on the page, I'm wondering, okay, if I put this sentence before that sentence, will that reinforce things better? And writers do this. The writer Dave Barry said he keeps rewriting sentences so that they're the funniest. He's a comedy columnist, and he wants them to be funny. And yes, if you rearrange a sentence enough, you can make it a lot more funnier. If you rearrange, if you look at your material and figure, how should it go? What should come first? What should come second? Experiment with the way you're presenting it. What you're doing is you're focusing the material to make your point. You're also giving it a flow so that it's easier to understand, easier to watch. Don't make your viewers do any work, because watching a film, watching a video, watching something on your phone is still a very passive thing. It's not a video game. So you want to make it easy to understand. You want to make it easy to watch. And when you use more than one interview, you're not having one voice say something. You have many voices saying the same thing. It builds, it reinforces. And that's why I say when you look at the transcripts, when you watch the footage, when you listen to what's being said on the soundtrack, you're looking for ways to link up stuff. You're looking for ways to put stuff together in the most dramatic way, in the most potent way that you can. Now, perhaps, let's see, I said that. Perhaps I should show you a brief clip here. Let me get out of this and figure out how to do this. Let's see. So I'm going to show you now, when you have a documentary, you sometimes get footage that isn't specifically shot for the documentary. And sometimes there's problems with it. So if you give me a second, I'm going to find a clip. I'll show you what the clip looks like before, just the clip that we used, and then I'm going to show you how we used it. Give me a second. Will this open up like this? And where this clip comes from, this is from my cable access show. And I did not know that we were going to use this for a documentary. I just had the guest on, and so what do I want to do? I want to do enter full screen. Anyway, here's the clip. You're going to see a couple of problems with it.
Well, 3,000 villages have been destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
and that is an immense number of people. It isn't people, it's villages.
Villages. You can see it from satellite, I understand.
That's
I mean, you
exactly
can go onto
right.
Google Earth and actually see these where these villages were. But
And
please,
inside,
go ahead.
when they're hit,
Mhm.
there's also a policy of raping the women in those villages as they go. It's a state policy, and the soldiers actually rape all those women as they burn those towns down. And so the oppression, as they sweep into those areas,
There are
it's
two
extremely
problems with this. One of them is that there is a graphic that hangs on the screen. Now, we could have just left the graphic there. It was kind of relevant. There it is. It's kind of relevant, but it was a question from, it was an email from a viewer. So we were stuck with that graphic up to this point. Second problem is,
and the soldiers actually rape all those women as they burn those towns down. And so the oppression...
need to back it up again, but I'll just tell you, at some point I interrupt his answer. And I say to him, oh, yeah, I had just done some research where I actually saw satellite pictures of these villages that had been burnt by the soldiers in Burma. So I interjected, well, you can see it by satellite. It's amazing. All right, so I stepped on his statement, but I wanted to use this statement in the documentary. So I actually sat down when I was editing this. I had an earlier version of this documentary where, all right, I went out, I found those satellite pictures, and I animated them, and a headline from British paper that showed, gave you visual evidence. I put it in there. But guess what? It was distracting. And it's not moving from A to B. It's an interesting side note. It's kind of dramatic, but he says something more dramatic. He's moving. So I had to cut myself out. Now, the problem is I step on his words. I couldn't if I totally cut myself off, I lose his words, and what he says doesn't make sense. So what I had to do was tried a couple of different ways of cutting it, just minimized what I had to say. I'm really in there for just a second. So here is the finished sequence.
Come close to their village, and then they start to escape and hiding in another region. They just only can carry their one basket and with their baby and with their small things to hide in for temporarily.
Looking over there, there was a fire and an ash burning sound, and so I said, "What is that?" And said, "My mom will tell me that that's the house that our houses that were burned down by the soldiers." So that's where I realized that I will never be able to go back to my place.
Well, 3,000 villages have been destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an immense number of people. It isn't people, it's villages.
Villages.
And
Please,
inside, when they're hit,
Mm-hmm.
there's also a policy of raping the women in those villages as they go. It's a state policy, and the soldiers actually rape all those women as they burn those towns down.
So what I had to do was, number one, I had to cover up all the stuff that had that email at the bottom. That was easy. We had plenty of other footage to cover that up. What wasn't so easy was first figuring out I need to lose my statement about the satellite pictures. It's kind of interesting, but it takes away from the point. He has a very strong point. I kind of interrupted him. Couldn't cut myself out totally, so I made a couple of edits and figured out how to minimize my voice there. And most people who watch it don't even notice that there's another voice there. They're paying attention. So I minimized that. But the important point is that I wanted to get to that statement as quick as possible, and I did not want to distract from that statement one bit. So therefore, cut myself out. Cut myself totally out. Forget about the satellite images. This is what's important. As I said, you have to be ruthless. You have to think of the distracted viewer out there, how to get their attention, how to keep their attention. You don't want to let up. And as I said, this can be a very powerful medium, and Final Cut or whatever you use to edit with can be a very effective, a very powerful tool. Now, am I going to be able to get this back rolling again? Let me see. Give me a second here. If we skip ahead enough pages. As I said before now, the more you edit, the better you will shoot. It just becomes instinctual. By the way, the more you edit, the more instincts you will have about this. Right now, if you're just beginning, your instincts may be a little shaky, and you have to try a lot of stuff. But your instincts will come into play, and I find editing to be a very instinctual process. Perhaps because I've been doing it for a while, but when you're in doubt, play the footage back, see how you feel. See is this pause too long? Does the statement come too quickly after that one? Do we see this for long enough to register? Keep that in mind. Also, I don't know if I have a note on this, but because we're dealing with television and somewhat distracted viewers, very few of you viewers are actually going to see it in a theater experience. There's a rule on television. You say everything 3 times. If you're making a statement, you tell them what you're going to say, you tell them when you're saying it, and then you tell them what you've just said. But Look at any informational program on TV, anywhere really, Meet the Press, something on MSNBC, an infomercial. They're saying things 3 times. Don't be afraid to repeat it. Now, don't be redundant. Hopefully you can find 3 different people saying the same thing with slightly different words so it isn't so boring. But you have to keep repeating it. Because in a theater, scientific studies have shown, in a theater, your best comprehension, the viewer who's paying the most attention to that film gets about 60% of what happens in the film. That's the person who's paying attention. That's the person who's decided they like your film, and they're sitting in a theater with the lights out and nothing else going on. 60%. That means 40% of what's said on the screen, 40% of what is shown on the screen is kind of lost. So don't be afraid to try not to be redundant, but don't be afraid to repeat yourself, especially if it's an important point, especially if it's important to your documentary. Because again, you don't know what circumstances people are going to be watching this. All right, so where do we get here? Do I have anything else to really say? Okay. Should your documentary be objective? Well, I don't know. You're making a documentary for a reason. You have some passion in there. You have some motivation that says, I need to make a documentary about this. Hopefully the motivation isn't money, because you're not going to make any money with a documentary. If you want to make money with a documentary, find out who the next Kim Kardashian is. That you'll make money on. Anything else, you're not going to make money. So, should you be objective? Well, maybe. There's nothing wrong with objectivity, but as I said, you're making it for a reason. It probably has to do with your passion. No statement is completely objective. So it's difficult to be objective about something you're passionate about. For my particular film that I worked on about Burma, no attempt was made to be objective. That would have been like, asking the Nazis for their viewpoint on the Holocaust. It's okay. We don't really need their side of the story. It's a military junta, and they wouldn't have sat for an interview anyway. If you're making a documentary, you can't rely on MNN, and you can't rely on any other single institution. You'll need a lot of resources, okay? MNN is open 6 days a week. I think we're open something like 76 hours a week. We're very accessible, but you can't depend on us to have everything that you need to make a documentary. First of all, we're here to support your public access, not your documentary making needs. They may overlap. We ended up putting a lot of this documentary on the air, and we're going to do a complete version very soon, an hour version. So, and we use a lot of the stuff that we gathered in other programs that didn't make it onto the documentary. But I spent a fair amount of time here working on it, but we also had other places. I was here on Saturdays and Sundays, go down to somebody's office and edit. So you cannot, you can't depend on MNN, and you can't depend on any other single institution to give you everything you need, access to the computer and hard drive space and expertise. You're going to have to go a couple of different places for that. The more places you have to go for that, the easier it will become. Because, if you're depending strictly on MNN, the facility, what you need may be booked, something may be broken, you only get to use it a couple of hours at a time. So you see what I'm saying? You need a variety of different resources. You need a variety of different resources. It can't be one institution unless that institution has given you a desk, a computer, and a grant of money and a period of time to complete something. Then they're supporting you, but other than that, we're not going to support that, and nobody else is really equipped to support that. Again, you need to be ruthless. You need to be very, very selective, Figure out what your goal is, how to get that, figure out what your message is, how to get it across to as many people as possible. Don't preach to the converted. Converted? Don't preach to the people inside of your movement. They don't need to see this. You need to preach to the people who are totally against your movement. You need to reach the people who disagree. You need to reach the people who don't care about the people in your documentary. Again, make them care.